Good evening. Calling to order this meeting of the Arlington Select Board. It is January 23rd, a little bit after 7:15 p.m. I'd like to introduce everybody we've got up front. All the way off to my right is Selectman John Hurd. To my right is Selectman Joe Curo. I am Selectman Dan Dunn. To my left is Selectwoman Diane Mahan, and all the way to the left is Selectwoman Clarissa Rowe. And we are joined by our town manager, Adam Chapdelaine, our town council, Doug Heim, and our board administrator, Marie Kropelka. Thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. So the first item on the list is the consent agenda. And we've got the minutes of the meeting and a request for a one-day beer and wine license for Robbins Memorial Town Hall. Ms. Rowe.
I'd like to table the minutes till the next meeting.
Second.
All right, so we're going to pull the minutes off the consent agenda, which only leaves the beer and wine license.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the beer and wine license with the tabled meeting of minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0 vote. Thank you. Next up, appointments, Clean Energy Future Committees. Nellie Aikenhead and Pasi Mietinen. Come on up to the microphone, both of you, please.
So, Mr. Chair,
welcome. Yes.
Just so you know, Posse was not able to make it tonight. I think the board has met Posse for prior committee appointments. If they'd be willing to entertain appointing him, but having him come at a future date, he'd be willing to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So, welcome. Why don't you just step to the mic, introduce yourself with your name, and just tell us a little bit about why you're interested in the committee. And
Okay, I'm Nellie Aikenhead. I'm on Brantwood Road. I'm interested in the committee because I believe in the goals of the committee, and I'm a business owner. You need a business owner representative, so I fit that bill, but I also come from the environmental world, so I'm hoping my two skill sets can help the committee.
thank you very much. Ms.
I highly recommend this woman. She has nothing to do with her living in my old house and me living in her old house. Nothing to do with it.
Nothing. Isn't that an HGTV show?
But Nellie and I have worked on environmental issues for a long time.
And second, and also Passy.
Passy, too.
Second.
We've got a motion from Ms. Rowe, seconded by Ms. Mahan. Any further questions, comments? All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, 5-0 vote. Thank you very much for
you,
volunteering.
Nellie.
Thank you, and thank you for setting such an ambitious goal. It's great.
All right. Next up, we have the Citizens Open Forum. So, except in unusual circumstances, any matter presented for consideration of the board shall neither be acted upon nor a decision made the night of the presentation in accordance with the policy under which this open forum was established. It should be noted there's a 3-minute time limit to present a concern or request. And and so I've got the list of the people who signed up already, and I also looked down our agenda, and I know we've got a number of items on the agenda that you may be here to talk about. So if you're here to talk about something that's on the agenda, it's probably appropriate to just pass, and then we'll let you talk about it during the agenda item. But if you have something that's not on the agenda, now is the time. First up is Ben Rudick.
You pronounced my name right.
Blind luck.
Okay, 5%. That's right on that.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry, start with your name and introduction and with your issue.
Ben Rudick, new to town, moved here 2 weeks before my baby was born, and he is 8 months old, so I've been here about 8.5 months.
Congratulations.
Happy to be here. Less snow than Northern Ohio. This is my first time in front of the Select Board. I'm excited to experience my first meeting. I'm here because shortly after this meeting, I'll be submitting a warrant article that I have the signatures for to allow all permanent legal residents of Arlington to vote in Arlington elections. This is something that existed widespread across the US prior to World War I. And after World War I, there was a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment that culminated in the passage of the quota system, if you remember. And then state by states, they rescinded the ability of non-citizens to vote in local and state elections. Massachusetts as well has a state law that prohibits this sort of activity. However, there are many towns in Greater Boston that have either passed a home rule petition or are working to submit a home rule petition. Those include Boston City, Cambridge, Somerville, Brookline, Wayland, Wakefield, I hear, is adding, Newton. because all of them realize the same thing that I feel, which is that it's a matter of fairness for these people that are legal residents that are paying taxes and may have children in school, maybe homeowners, maybe renting, or are part of the fabric of our community, that they should have a say in how their taxes are spent. And that, secondly, I think our town will be improved by having those voices heard and have those voices count. So I think it would be a great thing if Arlington were to throw its hat in the ring and be behind this effort to pass a statewide change, which will be required to enact this. There's currently a bill pending that's sponsored by one of our representatives to make this sort of state-level change. And so I think it's a great thing, and I'll be submitting this warrant article. This was inspired by experience I had 2 weeks ago when I was getting signatures for my own town meeting application to be on the ballot, and I found out that my neighbors who had been here for a decade and had children in school had no say in how their town was run, and why me, a transplant from rural Ohio who's been here for less than a year, should somehow magically have a more informed or more important opinion than them seemed to me nonsensical. So that's it. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Good to meet you, too.
Welcome.
I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about town meeting just a little bit, because it'll be, thank you very much for submitting.
sit down?
No, you can hang out. You may, but you don't need to. I won't be long. So just since you're new to town, you may not know, and other people who won't necessarily know. So once you submit it with the signatures, then it will be officially on the warrant. And then the select board and other bodies, but yours in particular, will have scheduled hearings for the different articles. And those hearings actually will start as early as Monday. So you want to get your ducks in a row, and you want to get your presentations and your backup material and your actual final proposal, like the actual language, ready as soon as you can. And then we'll make a recommendation to town meeting, which will be up or down on some form of it. And then, of course, then town meeting gets to do whatever it wants, regardless of what the actual recommendation is.
Okay, if I may add just 30 seconds. First, I'd like to thank Doug Heim for helping me to draft the language that I will be submitting. This was all done in collaboration with Town Council, as recommended. Furthermore, the reason that I wanted to speak to you specifically is that my hope is that the Select Board will be behind this initiative, so that come town meeting, it's not me, Ben, newcomer, presenting this, that it has the full weight and enthusiasm of the more important members of our community.
Thank you.
We're not the more important.
Exactly. Thank you.
More empowered
All right.
members, the better dressed members.
Thank you very much. I should also say, in general, the board, since items on Citizens Open Forum are not on the agenda, we can't take votes on them, and we generally try to limit our discussion to being very brief. I did take that opportunity to spend 45 seconds, but that was a little bit unusual. Next up is Kim K. Holt. I apologize if I misread the...
No, that's right.
So, welcome, and my same thoughts for you. If you could give yourself a brief introduction and then share with us your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Kim Holt. I think most of you know me. I've lived in Arlington since 2003 or 2004 and been very involved in town, have run a number of programs, started the after-school program at Audison in 2006 when a bunch of parents came to me and said, we need a program and nobody's doing it. Have run the Arlington Regional Model UN and Civic Engagement Program for 13 years, although I stepped away from that this fall because of some health issues. But I'm involved here in town, so that's who I am. I'm here tonight particularly because of the two things that are being presented. I'm a signature on Ben's thing, and I want to talk to you about the other one. And I'm very specifically here on the other one, but I was glad they were both on for tonight. The other thing that we're presenting to you and asking for you to, and we're going to present as a warrant tonight, is to see an article seeking to review the overnight parking ban and how they disproportionately impact targeted populations. And it's asking to see if the town will vote to provide a non-binding resolution to support an overnight parking program that provides exemptions for persons with financial and/or medical hardships, or take any action related thereto. And there's so much that I can say about this, and I'm not going to go. This has been an argument on the Arlington list. There's an article on your Arlington. We could go into all the stuff. Real quickly, let me tell you, I had the experience of, I needed my program to run the Model UN Civic Engagement, my van to run the Model UN Civic Engagement program, and I needed my van because I was working at a school in Wakefield, and there is no way to get from Arlington to Wakefield and back on public transportation, realistically. And I have a handicap placard. I have severe arthritis throughout my body. I have an immune system disorder. I have narcolepsy. I struggle. And I don't often let public see just how much I struggle. I'm in a low-income building on Mass Ave. When I moved in, I was told I would have a parking place. There are 7 parking places for the 10 apartments in the 2 buildings that are together. I was there from 2007 on. They didn't give us continuing leases after a while, and so there's nothing in writing. And suddenly, about 2 years ago, everybody in the complex has turned over, it seems like, but me. And I'm always the last one home because I'm working a job that keeps me in Wakefield till 8 o'clock at night, or I'm out with the Model UN kids till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And these people who are new in the building are taking parking places, and when I take one of the parking places, they're putting notes on my van saying I'm not allowed to park there.
So I definitely appreciate the...
And what happened, though, was when I went to management, they said, well, there's not enough parking for everybody, and, there's nothing we can do. And I said, I've got a handicap placard. You've got to make me a parking place. And they said, sorry, whatever. And it just took this whole process to resolve. In the meantime, I had nowhere to park. I live right across from the Brattle Street Fire Station. Where am I supposed to park?
So we've passed 3 minutes, and we will, if you submit the 10 registered voter, we will have a hearing on that later this year.
But that's the kind of thing, things change. It's not like when you move in what's going to happen. And people keep saying on the Arlington list that people know when they move in, things happen.
Okay. Thank you very much. Look forward to keeping an eye on the agenda and make sure, and anyone who signs a 10 registered voter article gets a notice of when the hearing will happen. So we'll do a full hearing on the issue when we get to that one. Next up, Lynette Culverhouse. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Lenard Diggins. Moved here in 1984, just retired as a teacher. In 1984, I could afford to move to Arlington and buy a home with a driveway. I'm addressing the same issue. And I know that Arlington has as a priority allowing diversity into the town and encouraging diversity in the town. And it feels like the fact that people who have a driveway get to park their cars overnight for free, whereas people who can't afford a driveway don't. It feels like a very punishing, discriminatory way to go. And in the larger picture, we're living in strange times, and what I've seen over the course of my life, the last 30 years at least, is a transfer of tax burden or public funds being pushed onto low middle class people in order to give bigger breaks to wealthy people. And this just feels like another piece of that, make the poor people pay. And the value of low middle class salaries has gone down and down and down and is worth much less. And as a town that values diversity and wants to encourage diversity and is wanting to be culturally sensitive, I think that we need to be proactive and take a real strong stand in favor of helping out people who can't afford a driveway or who can't afford to pay to park their car. It just is not fair.
Thank you. I'll repeat my statement. If we get that, if the petition comes in, it'll be on the warrant. We'll have a hearing.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Thank you very much. Next up, Steve Revelak. Welcome, Steve. You know the routine.
Steve Revelak, 111 Sunnyside Avenue, and I will do my best to follow the chair's advice, which is to be clear, be concise, and be seated.
Okay.
So I'm So in the interest of brevity, I support the petition to establish a permit parking program for low-income individuals or individuals with disability. I mean, I think we've, as a town, we tend to do a good job of taking care of people, and I think this would be, a good step in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up, Lynette Martin. Welcome. If you could welcome to the meeting. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lynette. Second Lynette tonight. I bet that doesn't happen often. I'm here to say some statements in support of the warrant being submitted. They worked with Douglas on the wording, and it currently stands as, to see if the town will vote to provide a non-binding resolution to support an overnight parking program that provides exemptions for persons with financial and/or medical hardships, or take any action related thereto. I'm a member of the Arlington Town Diversity Task Group. At this month's meeting, the DTG unanimously passed a motion to support the creation of a warrant article for a culturally sensitive approach to overnight parking exemptions in Arlington. And here are some statements to support that. Data shows that car ownership is intimately connected to keeping and maintaining a job, and therefore to economic viability and mobility for lower income and working class individuals and families in the United States. Additionally, many disabled folks who are disproportionately lower income need cars in order to survive because inadequate and inefficient public transportation does not meet their basic living needs in order to access things like groceries, medical appointments, etc. As such, the overnight on-street parking ban unwittingly acts as an exclusionary zoning law that makes it difficult for lower income and disabled folks to relocate here or remain here if they cannot find a dwelling with accessible or affordable off-street parking. There have been reported incidents of some landlords and or real estate agents being evasive, as we heard here earlier, or dishonest to prospective tenants about off-street parking availability or the existence of a ban, putting marginalized folks at risk. There are documented incidents of landlords charging extraneous monthly parking fees for off-street on top of rent and citing the on-street parking ban as an incentive to do so. I'd like to encourage the Select Board today to use their authority to address this and offer exemption programs for eligible individuals and families suffering from financial and medical hardship, separate from the waiver program and with no need of a hearing. And that a non-binding warrant article is being considered to put this question to the town. I'd also like to note that one of our longest-serving traffic unit officers, Corey Rateau, was quoted as saying he has no idea about the history or reasoning of the overnight parking ban other than that he thinks it's been around since we switched from horse and buggy to car. And I have lots of supporting data, but one that I thought was particularly compelling is one resident who stated the following testimony. I have a handicapped placard so I could park in a municipal lot, but I cannot walk to the lot from home. So either I have to wait at home or in the lot itself for the ride to come take me where I'm going, or I have to take a cab. Both are difficult. Taking the ride requires waiting an eon for it to arrive, and taking cabs costs me money I don't have. It's also really difficult to get to the lot every day to remove the car by 7 a.m. Then wait all day until it's time when it becomes permissible to park overnight again. I'm sure it's easy to imagine and realize how arduous this is. Like being handicapped isn't arduous enough.
Okay, so hang on. So we're coming up on 3 minutes, and I often give leeway, but we've got a hearing coming up, so I don't want us to go through it all
That's it. Thank you
twice.
for your time,
Okay.
and I appreciate you taking this matter seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Last name on the list, at least, is Shailene Pokras.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks. It's also my first time coming before the
And
Select
you are.
Board. And I will keep my comments brief because
your
I
name-
think...
brief intro-
Shailene Pokras.
Thank you.
I'm at 51 Crosby Street in Arlington. It's a new home for us. We were up by the Stratton School for a long time, right near Mr. Currow. And I'll keep my comments brief because I think I'll probably be saying this at the hearing that sounds like it's coming up. I'm here to speak in support of the overnight parking ban hearing that I think disproportionately affects people of certain incomes, and that does not affect me because I've always owned a driveway at my previous home up near Stratton School and my current new home near Bishop School. Both times I've had a driveway. I currently have a knee issue. I had to have knee surgery, And it's because I have acutely witnessed this recently where I found out I needed to drive my car to work when I normally take public transportation. With the snow and ice, I just couldn't get myself to the public transportation. So when my good friend Lynette Martin told me this was happening tonight, I said I will absolutely show up in support. So I'll save the rest of my comments for the hearing, and I just wanted to note that I have a letter of support from the Boston Center for Independent Living, which I think we will read at the hearing as well.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. So to everybody who's talked about that issue, and I've pointed to the hearing, one thing to think about is when we get to that hearing, as a board, we have to make a really specific recommendation to town meeting. We don't get to say, hey, we can't go to town meeting and say, hey, this is a problem, please fix it. Like, we actually have to craft what the actual proposal is. And so I will say that on behalf of us, it'll be really helpful the more that you can coordinate and discuss and come up with proposals, and I mean fairly specific ones, that give us meat to have a really productive conversation. So we heard today, I think it was a bunch of good sentiments and a few good solid ideas, but it will be convenient is the wrong word, helpful and productive if you can coordinate those. Ms. Rowe.
And that means actually specifying the income range, and I would talk to the planning department to get the usual low to moderate income that is federally mandated.
Mrs. Mahan.
And just to echo, we cannot discuss anything that's possibly going to be a warrant article amongst ourselves or amongst you all. I know just from hearing each one of us would do that. So it's kind of counterproductive to do, and it's, you know, we don't want an open meeting law violation filed against us. So I don't want you to think we're not responsive. We are, but we have to follow the process. Because someone could say, you know, you had these people in, it's a secret meeting, you had a discussion, and if I had known, I would have come in. So we really can't discuss it anymore. We have to wait for the hearing.
Is it a quick question?
It's a quick comment.
Could you come on up to, if it's a all right, if it's a comment, it probably isn't appropriate.
Well, it's raising an issue that's kind of...
All right, it's your second time, and this is really
Yeah, I know.
unusual, so you're going to be quick.
But I'm going to need surgery before your next meeting, so
All
I
right.
won't be able to be here. Whatever happens to this warrant proposal and stuff, an issue that got raised with this is that there's real selective enforcement in different neighborhoods, and that needs to be addressed. That I've worked with kids and with families in adjacent neighborhoods for years. I park overnight there, and nobody bothers me. But I'm in East Arlington or in my apartment, and I get a ticket immediately, even with my handicap placard. That needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have I went through the written list. Oh, Mrs.
Would you just remind them that I have to have that warrant article by noontime?
Yes, deadline for citizen voter articles is noon in the Selectmen's office tomorrow. Friday. I apologize. Noon on Friday. Is that what you're trying to fix, Doug? Sorry, I apologize, everyone. I don't even know what day of the week it is. All right, now, is there anybody here who didn't sign up but wishes to speak to Citizens Open Forum? And I would suggest if you're here about the parking issue, we may have covered it sufficiently until the future hearing. Seeing none, Citizens Open Forum is closed. Next up, traffic rules and orders and other business. Approval, memorial to honor the late Patricia C. Fitzmaurice. So just as a way of explanation, we had a request to name the grassy field near Schwam Mill. It's somebody who, come on up. Oh, I apologize. I was looking, I was like, oh, I don't see. Welcome, please introduce yourself and talk about the...
It's Dermot Whitaker, and I'm the president of the Schwam Mill Preservation Trust. And at the last meeting, I attended, I presented a recommendation from us, the board of the trust, and also Patricia Fitzmaurice's descendants, to name the piece of land in front of the old Schwam Mill, Mill Pond Park, and dedicate it to the memory of Patricia C. Fitzmaurice, whose swift action, I believe you got the wording in front of you, whose swift action saved the old Schwam Mill for generations to come, something along those lines. So it's a dedication of the park to Patricia, but the naming of it would be Mill Pond Park. That's on the recommendation of her children.
Mrs. Mahan got her hand up first.
Well, actually, at the same time, do you want to
Ms.
go
Rowe.
first, Ms. Mahan?
Well, I'm on for full disclosure, I'm on the Board of Advisors of the Old Schwab Mill, but I think this is a tremendous idea. Pat Fitzmaurice was a real preservationist in a time when preservation wasn't important to people, and she managed to save one of the most important historic resources we have in Arlington. I think it's an excellent idea, and I move approval.
Second. And I just want to note, we have the information that you supplied previously as inclusion in our agenda item, as well as you started the process last time. We sent it to the Public Memorial Committee. They met and unanimously voted and agreed that this does meet the criteria. So, so I second Ms. Rowe's motion.
Any further? I'll just say that one of the things that you get, when there's a memorial on the agenda, is you get to read the supporting letters. And those are some of I enjoy those more than you'd imagine, I think, out of all the things that show up on our agenda. All right, so we've got a motion by Ms. Rowe, seconded by Mrs. Mahan. Is there, all those in favor, please say aye. 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 All those opposed? 5-0 vote. Thank you very much for bringing that up and pushing it through. Next up, request second space, on-street overnight parking, 15 Lafayette Street. Welcome. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Mary Kowalczyk, 15 Lafayette Street.
I'm Stephen Steinke, 15 Lafayette Street. We're married.
Yeah. All right.
So we're seeking an additional parking permit. We have one. We now have 2 cars. Last year, we actually received a second permit so we had a permit for both cars last year. And this year, when we came to renew permits, we got one for our original car, and we're told we needed to come here to renew the second one.
We do have a report from Officer Rateau. This is a 2-family that already they have one, and the other floor has overnight parking. It's down at Lafayette. It's what I call the narrower part of the 2. And it stated that a second one was issued, perhaps an error last year, because we do have criteria in terms of, and I have had calls from neighbors down there who live on the wider side, who are asking why all these cars all of a sudden seem to appear. Officer Rateau does indicate that we really need to stick to the policy that we've established, because we already have, one of the criteria we say is we can only grant as much frontage as you have in front of that particular residence. And we've already done that with the 2, one for the first floor, one for the second. So this would encroach to one of the houses to the left and the right, and there are other houses in Lafayette that have, and they've come in for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and we've denied that. A little bit, they're closer to the wider end. So I would just, in following with Officer Rateau's
Can I just,
No, sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
motion, make a motion of no action.
We've got a motion from Mrs. Mahan. Is there a second? Second. I'll give that to Mr. Kiro. So we have a motion and a second. But I will give you another shot, but is there any further discussion from the board before Mr. Hurd?
I would just say that I think it would be a very unique situation based on our criteria to have 3 overnight parking permits for a 2-unit property. And you've heard discussions previously from this meeting. If we approved 3 overnight parking permits for this property, I think next meeting we would have about 3 hours worth of hearings for people that want overnight parking permits.
We don't actually.
I'm sorry. Is there anyone else from the board who has a comment at this time? Ms. Rowe.
I think it's doubly hard on you because it was given to you before. And that's the thing that bothers me about it, honestly. I'm not sure that they would have bought a second car if they hadn't already gotten the space. So I'm having a hard time with this one.
Do we get to say?
No. Now, how can I help? Yes, please.
We don't have a driveway, so you're correct. We were gifted the car. We didn't purchase the car because we never would have done that knowing that we would have gone through this process. So it was gifted to us. And we did the right thing by coming here and asking for a permit, and it was given to us. So we've had the car for an entire year. No one has ever said anything to us. None of our neighbors have complained to us. We've received none of that information. Had we received that information, we probably would have done something with it. So we've had 2 cars for an entire year now. I don't understand, what is our option? What are we supposed to do? I mean, if it was truly an issue, I don't know why someone didn't come to us and say something to us.
So my thoughts are, in terms of what the options are, is so parking is a challenge in Arlington. I mean, it's a very limited resource, and we don't have a way of allocating it because we can't like auction off the spaces. So with the way the restrictions that we have built, or the process that we've built is built around those restrictions, those limitations. And one of the things that I don't know if you know, is that we put on a question on the ballot a few years ago. We said, hey, town, do you want to relax this overnight parking? And it lost in every single precinct. I actually was elected to the board hoping to relax that, and I wasn't able to. I agree that the error is troublesome, but that is, but the recourse is renting a space from a person who has a lot, or from a lot, or from another household.
Or Magnolia.
Yeah. Mr. Curo.
Yeah, I think it's, unfortunately, I think sometimes folks don't act neighborly and maybe won't come directly to you. The information we have from the police is that 2017, there were 34 overnight parking complaints for the street. And 5 just the first 8 days of this year. So it may well be that your neighbors aren't coming directly to you, they're going to the police.
We have a parking permit, and we still receive tickets on the car. So I don't think it's actually a consistent thing. I don't think it's enforced entirely, because I do notice that there are cars that park on the street overnight without a pass. So I think it's something that's actually not enforced uniformly. I think it's kind of, when someone drives down the street, if they see cars, they give tickets. I actually don't think it's a uniform thing. And I do see plenty of cars parking at the other end of Lafayette who don't have passes, because most people on that street, they're 2-family houses that have driveways, they have renters. So I think it's a little bit burdensome for us to go to our neighbors and ask if we can park in our driveway when they're mostly 2-family houses that have capacity filled.
Is there overnight parking at the Thorndike Field?
Magnolia, Thorndike, yes.
Is there? I've actually, in my last house, was in this position where I lived in a house with me and my wife, and we had no parking. And we had to park in the Pierre School. It was a little closer than Thorndike is to you, but it was the same sort of headaches because I was parking both cars, as you might imagine. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one solution for you. It's a little bit of a walk, but it allows you to at least keep the second car. And like everyone's said, it's a challenge for everyone.
My question is, why do people who park their cars on the street during the day, all day long, to avoid paying the fee to park at Alewife, park on the street all day long, and that's not an issue, but us as homeowners who live there are not allowed to have a second car?
The answer, I think, is because the town, by ballot, has chosen that as a policy.
It's not us.
Yeah.
Can I say to that has been, as you know, a growing issue in East Arlington, because I've heard from residents on Lafayette Street that say, I come home in the middle of the day, I can't get in my driveway because they park and across. And what the board has been doing is similar to when we go for, an abatement and a betterment program, is some neighborhoods, some parts of the street, and you'll notice that other streets in East Arlington do have 2-hour parking signs up. And I know it's been discussed in previous years on Lafayette Street, but generally the board looks at that if at least 2/3, if not unanimous, neighbors on that area of the street or road say we want this. But sometimes the reason people turn away from it, because I know on Lafayette it was considered before, there may be new people there that do want it, but it then applies to everybody. And people say, what do you mean I can't? I want to be able to park in front of my house for 4, 5, 6 hours. But once those signs go up, it's 2-hour during the day. So you may want to talk to your neighbors if there's an appetite for that during the day. But tonight is different.
Yeah.
It's a different
And
issue.
I'm going to go, because I'll go pretty far afield, and I'll talk, so obviously places like Somerville and Cambridge and Boston have parking districts and stickers and stuff like that. And Arlington doesn't have the budget to afford something like that, and the sticker fee itself can't actually handle it. So one of the things that I'm hoping is that in the long run, the parking improvement districts and the meters we're putting up front are going to be able to generate enough revenue that will be able to support a program like that in the place like the density that we've got in parts of East Arlington. But the economics of it are that unfortunately we can't do that today, and so we are stuck with this very difficult way of allocating a scarce resource. And so if you look at the waivers that we do approve, there are often things like somebody who can pull into their driveway, but their driveway is really narrow and they've become bound in a wheelchair recently and they can't get in and out of their car. And so when someone comes to us with that level of hardship, we can grant the waiver, but it's very difficult for us to say, because on what is ultimately a matter of big convenience, but it's hard, we don't have a line that we can use to make those decisions. All right, any further discussion? So we have a motion from Mrs. Mahan, seconded by Mr. Curo, to deny this petition. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
The vote is 4-1, and with no action. Thank you for your time, and I'm very sorry that we weren't able to help. Next up, Envision Arlington Fiscal Task Resource Group, Gordon Jameson.
Thank you very much. I'm Gordon Jamison. I'm the co-chair of Envision Arlington's Fiscal Resource Task Group. I provided you lots of materials, and we're going to go through a very quick summary thereof. The other was hopefully for your background.
Yeah, just for the member of the board, Gordon and I had an email exchange, and I'd asked him to provide a summary and a bunch of backup material for us to dig into and ask questions and so on and so forth. So I want to give him the time and then see what follow-up questions we get for him.
Okay, so a little propaganda and then into the meat of the matter. So as you know, the Vision 2020 and Vision Arlington each has a goal. Ours is we value Arlington's efficient delivery of public services, providing for the common good. Benefits from these services and the responsibility of taxation will be equally distributed amongst us. We'll be known for our sound physical planning and for the thoughtful open process by which realistic choices are made by the town. And I think the town does a good job of that with your leadership and the manager's leadership and town meeting. So over the last 2 years, you may have seen in the Advocate a series of articles that we put together called Citizens Corner, which did many of the things you described earlier, Mr. Chairman, about how the town works. Last fall, we added one on the new finance department, and we have an upcoming one that was included in your packet on overrides and debt exclusions. That's under review by Mr. Pooler in the manager's office. The first 6 we put together in a governmental primer that's online on our webpage, on the town's webpage. And we'll be adding the other 2 into that over the winter, so it's available during the election process and also during town meeting and while people are in particular looking at the overrides and debt exclusions. The next thing we've been busy in the last 2.5 years is what we call leadership and financial interviews. Financial interviews are basically having the people in what is now the finance department, having them come in and just talk to our group for a meeting, and then they go on our way. We learned an awful lot about that. People should come to our meetings if they want to learn more about how the town works. The leadership interviews is something we've undertaken that's a very long-term activity where we spend about 45 minutes with different leaders in the town for departments. We've done it with the manager, the superintendent, the now ex-chief of police, Mr. Ryan, and the director of DPW. So we have a long way to go to get through all the department heads and perhaps some members of the Select Board. Once a year, we usually take a look at the annual warrant so the members of our committee understand what's happening there. And, and about every other year, we look at the financial plan put up by the manager's office and comment productively there. We meet monthly, and all members are on the third Thursday of the month, and everyone's welcome to attend. So the next thing, I mentioned the article on overrides and debt exclusions. And beginning last year, we attempted on the next page, the one that looks like this, we attempted to model the town's 5-year financial plan going forward. And we did that in May. And the blue line, hopefully the blue line is there. The blue line is the manager's base, appropriately conservative budget estimates going forward. And the way we look at this is As many, as you know, and many people at home know, the y-axis is the override stabilization fund. And if the override stabilization fund is above zero, that's good. If it's below zero, not good. So this showed you that the old override would last through 2021. We, on materials we provided, used a variety of more positive assumptions, and we get the other curves, which are mid, high, and what we call uber. And so on the right-hand side, under December, last year was a very good year for the town. The local receipts were good, free cash was excellent, so that made all those curves go up a little bit. But the outcome is that we still need an override this year or next year. And if you go down to the next column in the lower right, you'll see that by the manager's projection and by ours, that we get 4 years, beginning next year as the first year of an override, and perhaps some upside there. So really trying to give the board some dynamic understanding of the budget going forward, in that one could see it as we have, we'll have we'll get 4 years definitely out of and we used a $6 million override that should last for at least 4 years. Okay, the other thing, next page. Any questions on that?
I saw it in the in the appendix, but just what were the assumptions that made something that you used to improve the budget again? Like the difference to high to Uber?
Oh, so it's mostly assumptions on local receipts, free cash, how the decay goes from year to year.
Of free cash?
Of free cash, of local receipts, state aid. And one of them, the Uber one, we decreased the annual increase in insurance to 2% because it looked like that had been fairly low for a number of years. I can't remember them all, but it's in there.
Okay, thank you.
They were all thought out and done gradually. That was the concept.
I just have one question. On this page, Gordon, this is assuming no big policy changes. It's just a straight override with the.
This is straight override, no additional economic situations or the high school or an override or
policy.
Yeah, this
prescription. I know you have some policy ideas. Yeah,
we're going to talk about the high school and the override on the next page.
Okay.
So what we've tried to do on this page here is depict the structure of Arlington's tax lien, a tax levy on a. So we have, if you look at the three columns, we have basically we all think that we have two types of property, residential and commercial, but actually we have three types of property. We have residential owner-occupied, we have residential non-owner-occupied, and we have commercial, which is non-owner-occupied as well. If you look at the right-hand side, where they have the arrows, the total tax burden is all the base, looking forward to after the high school and an override, if they both were to pass, plus the high school, plus $6 billion, and then the debt shift I put on top. So the question that is before us is how might we ameliorate some of the large increase that an override plus the high school will, over a period of time, put on taxpayers, and particularly those of fixed incomes and lowered value homes. So one thing that's been discussed, I believe, by the board is to move the debt shift into the water and sewer billing structure. That would impact all three of those types of categories. The other option is to add a residential exemption of 5 to 10%, which would provide for an exemption of the first $35,000 to $70,000 of an owner-occupied property from tax. A non-owner occupied, and so is that clear? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So on the next page, there's some examples, and first of all, I want to comment and thank the manager and the assessor's office, in particular Dana Mann, who's the data guru there in the assessor's office, who provided us with these numbers, some back in December and another set in the interim. So again, I have the three different columns of the way I've divided the properties on the top. And the first line is what you get if you have what we have now. No exemption and a factor of 1. And so the question I asked the assessors to look at is what would happen if I had a 5% exemption and a factor of 1.05. And the big aha finding is that you'll see that the rates go up to from 1126 to 1171, 1171, and 1182. Okay? Now, what this tells me is that I know that we can make these rates all the same by engineering the factor to be a slightly lower number. Dan is thinking.
Keep going.
Okay.
I'm not there yet.
If you look at the next one, the numbers are all higher, but it's still close. So what it means is that we can have a 5% exemption and a factor of 1.05 and have the rates all be same, except for owner-occupied properties, there'd be a $35,000 residential exemption. Skipping up to the higher one for the 10% and a factor of 1.1, I know we can make these numbers. These are the numbers the assessors provided, but I'm sure we can find a number that's like, we can make the commercial 1220 to meet the others, but there the owner-occupied exemption would be 70,000.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just because this is not my bailiwick, so it may be a silly question. On the last three citations, the exemptions that are in there, the 35, 53, and 70,000, how did you arrive at those, or is that like a definitive number, or is that you've kind of plugged it in and it's the middle, it's the lowest, it's the highest?
It's the number, it's plus or minus, I mean, it's 34 something, but,
okay.
But it's the number the assessors provided for
Okay,
the exemption as well. So
Sorry.
I did not mean to interrupt, I'm sorry. So separating, instead of thinking about the tax rate for the minute, thinking about what the total tax bills will be, or is that, okay, thank you, yeah.
An example of how this might work is on the next page, the one with all the blue columns. Okay? So I only did 2 of them here because we don't have hard numbers from the assessors on that. So in the top one, what is shown is a 5% exemption and a factor of 1.05. And then the first column is the valuation of housing in thousands, from 250 to 2 million. The next column is the burden that will be placed over time once the high school is fully on for each of those properties, using the $1.11 that the manager spoke to at the last meeting on the high school. And the next column is an estimate of the burden for the $6 million override. And then the column in bold before the darkened bar is the total burden. And that would be the total burden on all properties, because we haven't messed with the factor or exemption yet. In the next columns, we have the three columns we had before, and in this one I've made the commercial the same as the non-owner occupied residential, just to be the example. Like I said, I know we can make the numbers equal. So if you take and add the exemption, the next column is adding the impact of adding the exemption and moving the water and sewer out on all the owner-occupied residencies, and then the net impact. So you should compare the total number in the first grouping with the net impact, and you see that even up to $2 million, although it's slight, there's an impact on the owner-occupied residential properties. In the non-owner occupied, there's a positive impact, meaning a negative number for the non-exemption by moving the water and sewer out as well. And so they too benefit from this approach below what would have been done in the first column under total. And the same would be for commercial, same numbers. And the bottom one is just the same one at a 10% and 1.1. Looking at this, one might do the 5 and 1.05 for consideration, and that gives the board in the future, the ability to look at 0.75, 1.075, 10%, and 1.1.
So.
And then lastly, on the right-hand side, the suggestion is how one might feather this in.
So, but let me just make sure I understand the summary right. So like by tweaking these different rates and different numbers, one of the possibilities is that not thinking about the rate, but thinking about like just the ultimate tax burden, like the actual amount that's being paid, we can make it such that the residential, non-owner occupied and commercial pay a greater fraction of the total budget than residential occupied.
Yes.
Yes. So, yes, and what that means is that we'd be taxing all commercial properties, not just the ones under the CIP, all commercial properties or properties that are rented as commercial. And this goes back to something, this idea came partly from discussions in front of the board at the tax hearing every year, but also from the fact that several years ago, the Board of Assessors mentioned that if there was a way to make the apartments, quote, commercial, because they're taxed under residential principles, that they would be perhaps in favor of a factor change. And that's exactly what this does, for all intents and purposes.
Adam?
Just one caveat to point out, without advocating in one direction or the other. So if you look at the 5% and the 1.05, the top on Gordon's sheet, just note that when you reach that $2 million value, that the returns start to evaporate, because the way the residential exemption works, when you reach a certain value, you pay more. So it's not just redistributing the tax burden onto non-owner occupied and commercial residential units, it's distributing some of it to owner-occupied residential units of a certain value. And so in this particular example, between 1.5 million and $2 million valued homes, you start to shift tax burden onto those residents, even if they live there. Again, no advocacy one way or the other, just I think it's an important point to make.
To that point, if I may, one of the most surprising things that I hadn't anticipated was the people with the $2 million home with 51 cents on the tax bill are paying $1,000 on water that they don't have any control over, and that they now have control if it goes back in the water and sewer. And you are correct, absolutely correct, that Adam, that the number after 2 million goes the other way. But the assessors, God bless their souls, they gave us the whole database, all 8 megabytes of it, and we sorted it, and I did the number of properties and the value, and they go like this until $2 million, and then there's a very few that go like that. So this covers a large number of the properties. A large part of the benefit.
Gordon, Ms. Moore.
I just want to pose something, and if it hasn't been something that's been discussed, or it's really way out there and I'm misinterpreting it, just a hypothetical, in light of the discussion we had previously under Citizens Open Forum, I'm just thinking and envisioning, like in chess, if you take this move and play it out, has there been any discussion that if we did go with the residential non-owner, commercial non-owner occupied, what I've heard from when we've tried to get the apartment buildings previously, I've heard from tenants and just unofficially, and a couple of property owners of the the apartment buildings, I'll call them, because nobody really wants to say their name unless they come up there, that the fear would be that they would pass on, under the non-owner occupied commercial, pass that on to the rent that they have, thereby, people who are in apartments who are low to middle income, which is my roots, would be possibly placing a burden on them. So then the question was, if the town did go that way, is there some sort of safeguard we could put in place so they couldn't do that? So that's the hypothetical. I imagine the answer would be no, but I don't know if anyone can.
So I don't think that can be done.
That they couldn't pass it on.
Well, first thing is, this is the joint impact of moving both the water and sewer and doing the exemption. Okay, the two together give you this benefit, rather than having it be equal based upon the water and sewer alone. The second thing I think that we discussed at our meeting last Thursday was every time we have these proposals put in front of the voters, the leadership, with all due respects, wrings their hands about how can we help people. And unless you're 65 and poor, nothing happens. Because
That's not true.
That's the impression I think that we had. Because if you don't have the income, and if you don't have a low income, if you have a lot of equity, I don't think a lot of these things work. There are ways to abate and have it held in abeyance as a lien, but we're just trying to have something that has the potential for a broad-based impact on owner-occupied properties.
John?
I just want to piggyback what Diane was talking about. In the residential sector, you can't charge tax increases, but you can charge higher rent, and no, we can't stop that. And secondly, to move that on, I've heard before, we've talked about the commercial rate and why we should have a commercial rate, because these big landowners that own commercial property have all kinds of money, but as someone who rents commercial property in Arlington, I just note that a lot of these commercial properties, the lease agreements they're all triple net leases. So all of each tenant is paying their unit's portion of the tax increases. So that does, per the lease, automatically require the business owners to absorb any increase in the taxes.
So
it doesn't cut into any profits from it doesn't have, so if there's a situation where you're not on a triple net lease, then it's just like a residential lease, but a good amount of the commercial property that we have is on Mass Ave and the storefronts, and I would say most of them are on triple net leases. So you're really passing it on to the small business owners.
So in the first block, they're all, if you take the water and sewer out and do the exemption, there's still a positive influence up to $2 million buildings for all properties, including the commercial.
It doesn't take long for a commercial building, I think, in Arlington to get to $2 million, though. I don't know what the assessments are, but.
All right. Other questions or comments?
Oh, I don't want to cut in.
No, that's, go right ahead.
So I guess I wanted to, and I don't mean to interrupt in the middle of your presentation, but I think from the board's point of view and from my point of view, I don't want to speak for the board, but I think it's great that Gordon's here tonight talking about this, because in past years, though it's great that you come to the tax rate setting hearing, that's always too late to talk about making these decisions, right? Because it's cooked, the turkey's on the table, and like, you got to use the carving knife, right? You can't, like, you got to do it. Now, we have a lot of time to talk about this and to look at it. So I think it is good that Gordon's here. It's good that this conversation is happening before the board. Absolutely. To try to tie together some of the things that the board members are saying, I think we have sort of a competing angle at what is a more progressive tax structure that the board can consider. The property tax in general is a regressive tax. It puts a higher burden on those with lower incomes. Sort of that's a commonly accepted principle. On one side, what Gordon is proposing clearly makes it more progressive in that the lower valued your property, the bigger the benefit you get. As you start to move up a higher valued property towards a higher valued property, you get less of a benefit. So there's a progressive nature to that. It's not adjusting or even taking into account what your actual income might be, but there can be some assumptions made based on the value of the property. But on the other hand, as Diane and John pointed out, if you're increasing the taxation of rental properties, you're actually putting more of a burden on the rent of maybe our most vulnerable residents. So that's increasing the regressive nature of the property tax. So I think there's a lot of policy matters here for the board to think about. And there's a lot of merit to it, but there's a lot of risk to it, I guess is what I'd say.
I think one of the things that you should be studying, Gordon, because you've been at this for a long time, is to look at what percentage of those commercial owners are, as John's saying, the triple net business owners. And, that kind of thing. So what we want to do is have intended consequences and not unintended consequences, like the non-owner occupied landlord that turns to the tenant and says, well, this is going up, you're going to pay for it. So, and this is also true in a business sense. We don't have big businesses here, we have little businesses. And one of the values of this town is that we have little businesses because it makes it a much more vital place to live and work and buy things in. And I think that we have to be really careful about assuming that the commercial building owners are the ones that are going to be paying, and like the renter, like the business owner renter. I think we have to really look carefully at, who is actually going to be getting the burden, and I think the burden will be on the small business and the tenants.
And that's beyond the capabilities of our group. That's something that perhaps the board can have the planning look at. There's no way that I know for us to easily figure out which building is X, Y, or Z. It's hard enough just to try to figure out. There's 18,000 different properties on that database. We're trying to just present an option to the board that hasn't been considered, that addresses the issue of, can the tax rate all be the same, except there's an exemption for owner-occupied properties that would provide broad-based tax relief.
Gordon, hang on, I'll give you another.
That's all. Yeah.
John?
Just one quick comment, too. When you talk about non-owner occupied residential properties, if there was a higher burden on that particular category, I think it's going to be absorbed more in, we talked about big apartment buildings, it's more likely to be absorbed on 2-unit buildings, where the owner can say, divide this tax increase by 2 and say, wow, this is a big tax increase per unit, and then will correspondingly increase the rent based on that. I think with 15 to 20 to 30 unit buildings, it's easier for the owner to absorb a tax increase.
Yeah. I've got Joe next, but do you have Joe?
Owner-occupied buildings 1 through 4 units qualify for an owner exemption. We checked that with the assessors. So it's only the buildings that have a use code that's above 4 units.
Okay.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate this, Gordon. I know that you and I had a conversation about this 2 weeks ago as well. I think one of the things that you probably hear some of us asking about is, I realize you can't easily map the commercial uses without getting into the zoning and all of that, but you must have a distribution curve of how many properties of each type would be impacted at each of these levels.
Yeah, so Pete's working on that, but
good.
All right.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah. So this has been really good. Do you have any closing thoughts, or?
I just want to restate that no matter whether it's an owner-occupied or not owner-occupied, because we're moving them water and sewer at the same time, all properties 2 million and under at the 5 and 5 benefit. Mr. Chaplain talked about the fact that there's an inflection point, and then above that you pay more. That gets, when you go to 10%, that gets squashed down. So, and I think, this is the board's opinion of this has always been, perhaps we tiptoe into this, and definitely this is going to be the biggest one-time increase over a period of years because of the high school, the way it phases in. And after that, I don't think there's anything really uber big that we have facing us as far as capital plans. So this might be the time to impact something like this, and then you can meter it going forward, perhaps by increasing the exemption to a higher rate afterwards.
Cool. Any final thoughts from the board? Thank you very much, Gordon.
Thank
That was
you.
thank you and your committee. That has been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for a helpful discussion as well. And we're around if you want to talk more.
I'm sure we will. All right. Next up, discussion and vote, police chief appointment process. Just as everybody knows, we discussed this at our most recent meeting, and we ended up on a 2-2 vote on no action. And we're back to talk about it again. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess without rehashing the points made at the prior meeting, I did, in speaking with two board members, it became more clear to me that I don't think I was clear in the last meeting, that the only thing I was asking for at the last meeting and again tonight is for a vote of agreement to place it on the warrant, and that there would still be a future hearing, much like the overnight parking article that we talked about. So just to put that point of clarity out there, that was, at this point, all I'm asking for. With that said, without fully restating it, I would greatly appreciate the board's further consideration of placement on the warrant and then eventual consideration of the matter for bringing forward to town meeting, taking the position out of civil service. That's.
Mrs. Mahan.
I know we all have received correspondence from the president of the Ranking Officers Association. I'll try not to repeat what I said before, because I know Joe was, even though he wasn't here in physicality, was here in spirit. But I
watched the whole meeting.
So I won't
So,
go over
yeah,
those
I
points,
did,
but
yeah.
I just wanted, just for people at home who don't have this, from the president of the ranking officers, he also talks about when our former police chief, Fred Ryan, and the various town officials made the argument to place this position back into civil service when it had been taken out about 5 or 6 years previous to that. The ranking officer, Conroy, says, their arguments in favor of the issue were varied, meaning police chief, then town manager, then town council, who were all in favor of putting it back in civil service. Their arguments in favor of the issue were varied, but they all agreed that the title of a civil service chief and the perceived authority that came with it augmented the chief's standing as a leader among his or her subordinates. I added his or her. It also granted the chief the authority and autonomy needed to effectively run the department in order to accomplish its mission. Then Chief Ryan stated in 2002, in keeping the position out of civil service compromises my leadership, and without that leadership, it is difficult to manage the organization. So I won't read the rest of it. I do take the remarks from the town manager saying, no, I just want this to go as a warrant, but we're also, if we agree with taking it out of civil service, I would imagine that's how you would vote, which I don't agree, and for all the reasons I stated previously. And I know Mr. Carroll watched those at home, but I just wanted to cite those particular sentences that we received tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Mahan. Mr. Carroll.
Thank you very much. I watched, it was a very spirited debate. I don't want to get into the substance of the matter. In the spirit of the evening, where we've told other folks who came forward, we're going to have a hearing if this goes on the warrant, and we'll get into the substance. I have a lot of ideas about it, based on a few different prisms that I look at it through. One of them being as a former legislative aide to the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Public Service. So I think that this is an important enough discussion that it does merit being on the warrant. It does merit a hearing so that we can air the substantive reasons. What do we feel the merits are of keeping it in civil service? What do we feel the merits are of taking it out? So I'll move to place it on the warrant, and then I'd like to address some of the substance at the hearing, assuming that we vote to do that.
Can I just ask one procedural question to that? Correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing precluding the town manager from placing this on the warrant, correct?
Well, so
I mean, you could do it.
Practice has always been that the language on the warrant would say either inserted by the Board of Selectmen or at the request of the town manager. So things that are more administrative in nature, non-controversial, the manager or other bodies can submit it and it will read inserted at the request of. When things rise to the level of organizational structure, government structure, we're talking about the treasurer change later, or in the past talking about the comptroller change, I have found it to be sort of, frankly, a risk for me to just place it on the warrant without talking about it with the board, because it ultimately sits there at the request of the manager, but at the request meaning that the board's okay with it, because the board is the sole body that can establish what goes on the warrant.
But can I press that, maybe through Attorney Heim, not to put you on the spot, because town manager you report to, legally, the town manager could insert this at the request of.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. I think if the town manager wants to insert an article on the warrant over something within his general jurisdiction, he may.
Thank you, that's all. I don't want to,
Yeah, okay.
it's what the imprimatur is, but go ahead, sorry.
John?
So I'd say I'm definitely one of them in the last meeting that I wasn't clear on what the procedure was. I am now. I've spent a couple weeks researching this, and I spoke with a number of people, both inside the department and outside of the department for ideas. I mean, I think the one thing that I had mentioned last meeting that gives me some hesitation is just the idea that we have just at this current juncture, it doesn't feel like it's necessary because we have great candidates within the department. I think there's certainly, reasons to do it outside of just the hiring process. That's the concerns that I'm hearing from people regarding this, is that there's just a lot of support for, 1, 2, 3, 4 people that are currently in the department, and I think it's such a well-oiled machine right now that it would be disappointing to me to not give somebody the opportunity to continue what the chiefs built for the past 20 years. I don't know if that, I think it certainly warrants a discussion and a hearing, but that's the one thing that I am hearing consistently is from people in town that have been involved in the discussion.
So I would offer, we can again get into this in more detail should there be a hearing, but when Chief Ryan almost left for the MBTA 4 years ago now, the memo that I'd sent to the board at that time said that if I would commit to having, even if we took it out of civil service, having the first hire come from within, so that there was a feeling that, just as you described, the existing well-oiled machine would provide the opportunity for someone, in the ranks for this first time to be promoted, but make that structural organizational change going forward for the long view. To make this work, long view of the town, for what I'm recommending I think is the best approach for the town. That is something I'd be willing to consider again. Taking it out, changing the process, changing the structure long-term, but this time, first time, saying we'll stay within the department for the hire.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Curo to place this issue on the warrant. It's seconded by Mrs. Rowe. Is there any further discussion at this time? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
No. John, just to be clear, you were a yes. Sorry, thank you. I apologize. I didn't want to be clear. So 4-1 vote, and we will have a hearing, I don't know, February sounds good to me. All right, so next up, discussion and approval, did I make sure I didn't skip anything? Yeah, okay, Select Board warrant articles. This is the same type of vote that we just took for that one, but we just have a whole list of them. Just as a reminder to everybody, we don't need to go into the merits of each one of these in detail because there will be a subsequent hearing. This question is basically whether or not we want to put them all on the warrant. Mr. Heim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you have a list of articles that either were deemed to be appropriate for the board to consider whether they should come from the board, or articles that members of the board raised either individually or at previous meetings. I want to note, just for everybody's the context, we are...
Sorry, Doug, your microphone's a little drifted. The millions at home can't hear you.
Sorry. Just for a bit of context for the millions and millions at home, we put together this set of articles in part because they were articles that either merited some specific attention from the board so that they could either be endorsed or be from the board because of their nature and quality, or because there were specific things that the board has raised over the past 6 months to a year, or individual board members have requested. One larger context that I want to set up for the board and for those millions and millions is that we are looking at a longer one. We have, I think, at least 15, maybe 20 zoning articles. We've got a large number of resident petition articles so far. We may not have positive action on all those things. Mr. Leone's developed a wonderful consent agenda system, but we are looking at a long warrant. So we tried to be judicious about what things we were placing on the warrant. So with that, if the chair would like me to go through each one of them, I'm happy to do that, or if the board would prefer to just ask any questions that you have about the articles listed here, I'd be happy to do that as well.
I guess I'd suggest that we pick off the ones we really want to talk about and then see what's left. Is that?
Yeah.
So, anyone want to go first?
I thought they all made sense. I mean, I looked through them.
So actually, let me, in that context, then, let me suggest that we actually don't need to do the early voter one.
No.
And the reason we don't need to do that is because I got an email conversation today that was, so there was a 10 registered voter article that Doug had been working with the author that, that I got a copy of today, which is, see if the town will vote to establish a study group to examine the ways of modernizing the town's electoral system and make recommendations to the town clerk, the select board, and town meeting, including but not limited to voter registration practices, early voting practices, non-citizen voting, ranked choice voting in the next annual town meeting, or take any action related to thereto. And as far as I'm concerned, that covers everything that I was contemplating under B, and so I'm.
And who submitted that, please?
I don't believe it has. To my last I knew, it wasn't submitted yet, but it was Krista Kelleher.
Okay.
Is that resolution,
So that
it
is,
says early voting, where is voter access, or is that the same one?
It's B.
That's what it's called.
I was talking about B. Which one are you on, sorry?
That's what I, in what Attorney Heim provided, if, it's the, it says, because to me, it just seemed like might have been the same thing. I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, it's called voting access, but it's the same thing.
So early voting is the voter access language.
Yes.
Okay,
As
I was going to
much
say,
access to
it
voting
seems
as
like we have two of the same things. And then my other question is really sort of my rhetorical statement before about the apartments. If some group, entity, individual with 10 registered voters submits a warrant article that's pretty synonymous with this, I would anticipate that would do what we've done in the future, is just add them on as submitted by, Select Board. I'm just gonna pick League of Women Voters or Human Rights Commission. And I'm not saying we have to do that, but that we would consider that at the time.
So is the question whether or not it would be submitted at the request of 10 registered voters and the select board?
My thing is, I know from years past, like when I first got on the board, and I don't want to recreate that dynamic, not that I'm saying it is, sometimes warrant articles would come forward and people, the group, the individuals were really invested in it. And then instead of asking them to join, that the then Board of Selectmen, it would just be submitted from them. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not committing that we have to do that, but I'm just saying as these come up, and if we have parallel, Select Board has this, but then we have a group or an individual with 10 registered voters to say, okay, we can submit this together as a group,
Yeah, I think we definitely can do that. And Josh, do you want to?
I'm just trying to get clarification. So you're suggesting, like, if we go through here, that the first one be inserted the request of the Select Board and the Board of Trustees of Libraries together, a joint request?
Mm-hmm.
That type of thing.
And/or if some other group.
If it is.
Especially around early voter access, I anticipate there may be, so I'm just saying.
I would, with the, I think it's wonderful to have committees studying things, but I want to make sure that we are ready early for the 2020 voting season, and I'd like to put an end date to the study committee to have their findings at a certain date that makes sense. I think one of the things that we've learned in the last year is that because we rent out Town Hall, that some of the election options that we have are not as robust as they could be, because there are weddings happening on days that we want to have a vote. So I think that we need to do, that also is access to voting. And I think we need, and especially early voting, we're going to have to really look at the voting calendar and the rental property that we get for renting out Town Hall carefully, because that has meant that we had a whole weekend day that we couldn't use, we couldn't have early voting, and that can't happen again. I think the early voting has to come before our revenue for town hall rentals.
Doug?
So in advance of tonight's meeting, I did speak with both Ms. Krapelka and the town clerk's office, who have made it clear that they are, regardless of any of these warrant articles, they are committed to making sure that that doesn't happen again, and that they have, you know, for the next 2 years, ensured that there's no weddings.
I know that's true of the selectmen's office, and the Select Board office. I just want to make sure that early voting happens on Saturday and Sundays, and that there's no exception.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding is we can certainly have 2 warrant articles that speak to similar issues, one being to form a study committee and another being a resolution of town meeting. The study committee article, the last time I read what the resident was proposing to submit, did have a clause to submit a report to the next annual town meeting. So, in other words, I think they'd be looking at a relatively short study committee.
Yeah. So there would be this in the end of April, it would be
Next
following.
December.
2020.
Okay,
So they'd take that 9-month period
okay,
to.
So it would be tight on the primary, but sufficient for the general.
yeah. Okay.
And just on that, which is just an evolution of this, could we, in the interim of that possibly 1 year, just through the chairman and whomever, and select board office and whoever else you deem appropriately, maybe just sort of, and you may already have done this or be doing this, sit down, look at the 2020 election, look at the dates, the Saturdays and Sundays, or nights or whatever around that, come up with a calendar and block it off so that the entity that really has no idea, like, as these events are booked a year in advance, we don't want to go to a bride and groom.
We've already done it for 2 years in a row. We've cleared the
Great.
calendar for early voting in March, also in September, in November for 2 years in a row. No weddings, nothing.
Can we get a copy of that? Because it seems like we say this and then something comes up. So maybe in a month or two, after you all, so we all can see what those dates are, that they're definitely blocked off.
That's fine, that's not a problem.
So sorry, John.
Can I ask a question about a different article? Or are we still-
Let me stay on this article for a moment, if you don't mind, then. While I totally agree with the calendar, and I'm really glad that, and Marie, like when we had that problem this most recent year, she immediately updated the calendar. I just want to be clear that specifically is like, that's keeping us from avoiding the mistake we already made.
Yeah.
But what I want us to do is to be much more broad and to look at what the mistakes we haven't made yet, or we did and we didn't even realize. So for instance, one of the things that I'm really focused on one of the many is registration voting hours. Like, when is it that you can actually vote? Because I don't think we're doing enough in terms of registration.
We're not.
So there's actually a broad set of things that I would like us to look at.
Right.
And I'm really excited about the citizen article because I think it has the right scope and the right attitude at working on those things. Any further discussion on the early voting article? John?
So a question, I don't know if it's Adam or town council, on the water line replacement. So the way I'm reading this is that anytime someone sells a house, like they have to get a smoke certificate, smoke inspection, we're going to require them to get a separate water inspection of their water lines?
For their service, that is their responsibility, from the service line that connects from our water main to their house.
Does that include the sewer main? Or just the line in?
I think DPW's intention for this, correct me if I'm wrong, is just for the water pipe.
Is the town available for inspections of this, or is this, they need to hire private inspectors?
They need to hire a private inspector. And the reason for this is, the board has talked about this in years past, we haven't talked about it as recently. The town, as do many towns, always has a lost water number. Water that comes into our meters via the MWRA, but is not billed at other meters. We continue our loss or leak detection program. We continue our water main replacement program, but we've struggled mightily to get that number down. And DPW has had the experience that when they've been involved with witnessing water line or service line replacements, seeing, as Mike Rademacher would describe them, seeing Swiss cheese removed from the ground. So we believe that some significant portion of our water is being lost from our main and going into people's homes. The reason they have water or have pressure and there's not a leak is they're so old, they're caked with dirt, and literally the dirt is allowing the water to stay in the pipe and go into the home, but it is slowly leaking into the ground. So, you know, I think me, Doug, and Mike fully understand this is something new and might be a little controversial, but in an effort to curb lost water, this is a proposal we're looking at.
Yeah, because I deal with this in my business aspect of it, and it's generally more with the sewer mains. It's not part of a normal inspection, but I mean, when this comes up and somebody inspects and it's an issue, you're talking $15,000 to $20,000 to fix. So it's not, so, and I think, you know, like you said, there is probably a need for it.
Yeah.
But people just have to understand this isn't something that can just sail through. It's going to cause some headaches for some people selling. And we have, with increased property values, people can now absorb it. And there's, you know, I look forward to arguments in favor.
Yeah.
But I just want people to understand that I've dealt with this in different situations, and it's not small change to fix.
Agreed.
So,
That's
John,
accurate.
are you saying that it should be not only for water, but also for the sewer line?
No, I was just asking because
You
no.
Just a housekeeping thing, just because Mr. Jameson appeared before us and represented that according to
Yes, we hadn't
the
done anything.
assessors, there are 3 categories of properties in Arlington. Could we just either stick the word all before commercial or put the 3, would the word all encompass that?
That's a valuable suggestion.
Just
Thank you,
because
Ms. Vaughn.
someone could
Yep.
come in and say, well, you know, that means commercial occupied, not whatever. So
Point well
if
taken.
that
Thank
doesn't
you.
mess you up, thank you, okay.
That's it.
So, anyone want to talk about any of these other ones? And again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about them during hearings, but at the moment, we're saying we're going to be talking about all of these things in a future hearing.
Move approval?
Second.
Further discussion. Doug, you okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Moved by Mrs. Mahan, seconded by Mr. Hurd. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0 vote. 2020 budget presentation, Mr. Chapdelaine.
Thank you. I'm just going to set up.
But I didn't want to ask. Because I agree.
Thank you.
But you wouldn't know that, you're right.
No correspondence received in 2 weeks.
Sorry.
Wow.
Happiness.
I think,
Town manager's ecstatic, you're all watching.
I think five's the highest
You
number
got a packed
ever.
house.
That's great. Ready? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I believe we started doing several years ago, I wanted to give the board really a brief overview of the fiscal year 2020 budget proposal that was submitted last week on January 15th as required by the Town Manager Act. As we'll talk about in this proposal, it's an evolving document in that we put together our estimates for revenue prior to the governor's budget being released. Governor's budget was released today, and I'll talk a little bit about what are actually some dramatic changes, positive changes in the governor's recommended funding for the town and the schools that somewhat instantly make this recommendation moot in some regards, but yet very relevant in others. So we'll talk through that as we go through. So Doug, if you go to the first slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the budget process. The board's very familiar with it, but for those watching at home and those here tonight, I think talking a little bit about the process is helpful. Talk a little bit about the high-level look at our year-over-year budget overviews from revenues and expenditures. Talk about some highlights, what we're doing to fund the school department this year with ever-increasing enrollment that the school department's facing. Talk about some of the changes we're proposing in the town sides in response to the community needs that we're seeing. Talk a little bit about the long-term outlook, which I think will tie nicely into the next agenda item that the chairman's going to talk about. And then talk a little bit about where we go from tonight to actually seeking budget approval later this spring at town meeting. So in terms of the budget process, as the board knows, in Arlington, as in many communities, the budgeting process is really a year-round process. The budget itself covers a 12-month period, and we work a better part of the year, either internally or externally, on developing and then working on or justifying the budget. So the basics are the fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So the FY20 budget starts on July 1st, 2019, and ends on June 30, 2020. It takes most of us a couple years to figure out how to properly know what budget year it is, but the secret is it's the budget year of the calendar year that it ends in. So it ends in 2020, it's the FY 2020 budget. So we start putting all this together in September when we start the capital budget process. That's when we ask all departments to have their capital budget requests to us by, and those are then forwarded to the capital planning committee, which processes those over the course of the fall. They then provide that to the town manager's office, or really in conjunction with the town manager's office and the deputy town manager, to have that included as part of the January 15th budget submission. About 2 months later, in November, we have our operating budget requests due to my office from all operating departments. We then spend the better part of November and December working with all of the departments on those requests, refining them and getting them ready for the January 15th submission. As we've mentioned, in January, all that leads up to us submitting that book that's been distributed to you on January 15th, as well as to the Finance Committee. Starting in January, actually really in February, the Finance Committee will start in earnest its budget hearings. I'll be going with the Deputy Town Manager to the Finance Committee on February 13th to kick off the process. Talk about things similar to what we're going to talk about tonight, as well as talk about the long-range plan, and then the chairman usually gives an opportunity for any other questions about the warrant to the Finance Committee. From there, so in between that, we put together a more robust document that's provided to the board as well as to the public that we call the financial plan. And that really contains mostly the same numbers, though updated based on the governor's budget and perhaps the House budget. But the same numbers, and it's a more narrative-based, statistically based version of the budget that we issue. From there, the Finance Committee finalizes their reports to town meeting. So they actually put together a Finance Committee report to town meeting, which is yet a third document that contains the budget numbers. But that's the document that town meeting actually votes on to approve or consider approving the town and school budgets. They then go before town meeting in May, hopefully, for both the operating and capital budgets. And then, again, the fiscal year comes to an end on June 30th. But everything we've worked towards will take effect in the following July 1st. So that's the budget process.
I think you should guarantee that May date. Sorry.
I'm regretting putting that on the slide after talking about the warrant tonight. You can go to the next slide. So this is a little hard to see, but we break down the categories of revenue into certain categories, and this really is sort of just a snippet of the backbone of our long-range plan. So you see we have property tax, local receipts, state aid, school construction aid, free cash, other funds, which is solely the overlay reserve surplus that we talk about each year, and the override stabilization fund. And then below that, we represent what we take as transfers in, or we call them offsets from the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund, to offset costs of general government departments that support the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. So you can see under property tax, we're projecting a 3% increase. That's representative of the 2.5% increase that's allowed under law, as well as $650,000 in new growth. Local receipts, there's a change this year, and it actually ties in with some of the things that Mr. Jamieson was mentioning earlier. Looking at the historical averages of what we've collected in local receipts, we normally would budget a $100,000 per year increase, but our recommendation moving from FY19 to FY20 is to increase the local receipts estimate by $700,000 to come more in line with what our historical collection rate is. Local receipts, the majority of local receipts are motor vehicle excise tax. The vast majority of that nearly $10 million. About $4 to $4.5 million is motor vehicle excise. The remainder are building permits, licenses, other fees that we charge that are not based on the property tax. Below that, we have state aid. We have assumed as part of this budget that's before you tonight, as well as part of the long-range plan, that state aid, both unrestricted general government aid and Chapter 70, which is education funding, would grow at 1% a year. Since this document was put together on January 15th, the governor's budget has been released. We learned a little bit about it last week and then about all of it today. The governor's recommending that unrestricted general government aid grow by 2.7%. And the governor's also recommending that Chapter 70 have the full Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations implemented. We've talked about that here before, which for Arlington would be nearly a $2 million increase in Chapter 70, which is a tremendous increase.
That's great.
So there's more for us to talk about that, but want to mention that as we're talking about state aid.
But that's a proposal.
It's a proposal, still has to go through the House, still has to go through the Senate, and but it's hard to go down, but it is just a proposal. School construction aid is monies that we still receive from the former school building program, which was called the SBAB. It was the predecessor to the MSBA. And in the old days, the SBAB would pay us their share of debt service along with when we were paying the debt service associated with school rebuilding. The current MSBA pays in real time, so there's no payments that come over time. But these are the last payments that I believe are associated with the Pierce rebuild, and they expire, I believe, in FY21, so this should be the last year that we see those in an operating budget year. Free cash, the policy of the town for a long time now has been to appropriate as an operating revenue 50% or half of the prior year's certified free cash, so that you see just those numbers there. For FY19, we have a certified free cash number, and 50% of that is the $5.5 million amount you see on the screen. Below that is other funds. That's what we annually ask the assessors to declare surplus from the overlay accounts. From an operating point of view, we're recommending the $200,000 number. However, as part of the long-range planning effort leading up to the potential override, we are talking about taking what is a larger surplus that's in the overlay account and transferring it into the override stabilization fund to be part of the overall package and defray the cost of the override the board's going to consider putting on the ballot. And that'll be represented in other documents. Below that's the override stabilization fund. Last year, FY19 was the first year that we made a withdrawal since the override of 2011. And you can see, as the plan was designed to do, once we reach that point of contributing, we then start to pretty significantly withdraw from the override stabilization fund. So you can see we're looking to take $4.3 or almost $4.4 million out of the override stabilization fund in FY20. Again, we then offset, we take in as a revenue monies from the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund to come up to the total bottom line budget. You'll see that those offsets also represented on the expenditure side as an offset to municipal expenditures. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to you. Do you want to stop for questions or go right through and?
Any revenue questions? Joe?
Just a quick one. We just discussed putting on the warrant a couple of the articles relating to short-term rentals. Is there a ballpark idea of how much that might bump local receipts?
I can honestly tell you, I don't have a good source to know what it might be.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to work towards that, obviously, before we make any recommendations to town meeting, but we've tried to figure out a way to estimate it, and I don't have a good number to share with you tonight.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just a little silly thing we discuss every single year, but people on the street. The reason we say free cash, that's a defined term. We can't change it to unencumbered funds. Like, 'cause people say, especially with the override and exclusion, where's this free cash? And if you,
That's a great point.
do you have more free cash? You know?
Thank you for reminding me of that. You know, the municipal finance nerd joke is that free cash is neither free nor cash.
Mm-hmm.
And it is neither. Free cash is, in a nutshell, it's the revenues you collected beyond what you budgeted and money you turned back that you didn't spend that you budgeted are collected into free cash. So unencumbered fund balance would be another way to talk about it. But it's not just free money. It's really the operating surplus that's available at the end of a year. So that's what free cash is. It's a good question. So for expenditures, I'm sorry, you can go to the next one, thank you. So the top line, we have the municipal department appropriations, followed by offsets, and then the total that we're actually putting on the tax rate for municipal departments. As the board knows, as part of the override plan, town departments now are capped at 3.25% increases on a year-over-year basis, so we're only to one decimal place there. But for this FY20 budget recommendation, we're at exactly 3.25% for the municipal departments. For the school department, I'll talk a little bit more about the formula on the next set of slides, but we are still keeping a 3.5% increase in general education, 7% increase in special education, and then implementing what we call a growth factor that multiplies 35% of per pupil expenditures as certified by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, multiplied by the number of new students that came into the district last year to come up with a growth factor to recognize the growth in school enrollment and the funding that's required to support those students. So for this year, that adds up to a 6.2% increase for the school department. Below that, we have the Minuteman School. That's a combination of the operating costs along with the debt service associated with the building project. I believe there's further debt rolling on this year, and you can see that is leading to at least a projected 10.8% increase. Below that, we have both our healthcare and our pension costs. We have an agreement with the retirement board to cap pension increases at 5.5% a year, and that pension number is at that figure this year. And for healthcare, as you know, we're in the GIC. We estimate at 5.25% for premium growth. Right now, the GIC is estimating that the aggregate growth in premiums will be 3.3%, but we won't actually know those numbers until March 1st. So healthcare numbers will be updated as part of the financial plan when we have those figures. Below that, we have the capital budget. Those are the cumulative numbers that are provided by the Capital Planning Committee. And the key way we measure capital is we limit it to being 5% of operating revenue every year. So we don't spend more in capital than what is 5% of operating revenue. Below that's the MWRA debt shift that Gordon had talked about a little bit earlier, that the board's very familiar with, and in future years the board has approved starting to eliminate that shift. What that is, again, for those watching at home, is there's a statute that allows money associated with borrowing done by the MWRA for both the water and sewer improvements that they made in past years to be put on the tax rate rather than on the water sewer rates. So that's what the MWRA debt shift is. That very random 5593112 number is a number that was captured in time, I believe, back in 2007 or 2008, and was just frozen at that number. I don't believe there's really any rhyme or reason at this point to that number other than that it was frozen at that time. Below that is warrant articles. The majority of what is contained in the warrant articles line is funding for our other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, trust fund. Basically, like pensions, we have an unfunded liability for retiree health insurance. So we put a large portion, almost $1 million a year towards our OPEB liability. The remainder of that number are the smaller warrant articles that we consider every year: flags on graves, funding boards, committees, and commissions, public celebrations, and other miscellaneous warrant articles that come in that line. Below that, we have both the reserve fund and the elections budget. The reserve fund is now budgeted at 1% of the operating budget. The majority of why we put that much aside for the reserve fund is to buffer against snow and ice deficits, depending on the severity of a winter. And we put the elections budget there because elections fluctuate based on whether or not it's a state election year or not. So rather than having the town departments be both in one year the beneficiary, but then in another year the victim of fluctuating elections budgets, we put it in a separate line item so that it can be by itself. Below that, in past years, the Override Stabilization Fund has shown up as an expenditure because we've made deposits into the fund, but as we discussed earlier, we're now making withdrawals. And then the final number to mention here are the non-appropriated expenses. Those are all the items that show up on the cherry sheet, on the second page of the cherry sheet. So the state gives us money on the first page of the cherry sheet, and then they take it away. They take some of it away on the second page of the cherry sheet. So the majority of what you see in non-appropriated expenses is our MBTA assessment. The remainder is charter school tuition, our contribution to the regional mosquito control board, and some other small assessments that show up in our cherry sheet. So that's an overview of expenditures.
I actually have one, and I should know this, but I don't. But so on Minuteman, if that includes the capital, that capital is exempt from 2.5 because we did an override. How does that get captured? The fact that it's not.
So it should be, though, I would have to absolutely verify before we finalize it. It should be in the property tax line as well as in, the way we've done it in the years past, when we get the final numbers, we collect it in property tax and then we budget it in the Minuteman assessment.
Okay. Just maybe that in this case, it may not fit there.
May not fit.
And just in terms of like most of the things here are,
Excuse me.
like for instance, we don't include any expenditure on capital for other schools that are exempt.
We actually do report them in the capital budget.
In the capital, but we don't put it, oh, you do, oh.
Yeah, because, so we have to appropriate it, right? It's still subject to appropriation. So.
Okay, all right.
Exempt debt, we report in the capital budget, we talk about it in the capital budget, and appropriate it, but we don't hold it against the 5% cap because it is raised via taxation.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I just think we may be treating Minuteman different from our other schools in that regard, in terms of how we view them. Because you look at this and you say, okay, the school budget is going up by 6%, but actually it's really going up by more than 6% because of a capital project, which is included. Whereas in Minuteman, we're saying it's going up by 10%, but that is both operating and capital. And so in one case they're distinct, in one case they're lumped together.
We could, in this plan or in the long-range plan or really any document, we could break them out. I mean, we have the different numbers.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I'm not, thank you. I'm not sweating that right now. Okay. Other expenditure questions?
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So to talk a little bit about education, I really already described this, but to talk about it again. So when the plan first started in 2011, the agreement was to allow general education costs to grow by 3.5% and special education costs to grow by 7%. And the 7%, which is talked about in most years, was based on what the long-term average of special education cost growth was. There are years that are higher than that and years that are lower than that, but the average has been 7%. In recent times, the school department has been at or beyond the 7%, but in prior years, when below, they have made appropriations into what's called the Special Education Stabilization Fund, so that they can set money aside to then use in years where the costs exceed the 7%. It was starting back, I believe, in FY 2015 that we started to see the really significant growth in the school population. And that's when the school committee and the school department came to the long-range planning committee and said, really, they wanted to live within the confines of the agreed-upon plan, but based on the school enrollment growth, it was becoming very challenging of meeting the needs of all the students with the growth. So it was at that time that the town, via the long-range planning committee, said, we recognize these costs. We don't feel that every new student generates 100% of per pupil expenditures, because you're not building for every new student, you're not building a new classroom or hiring a new teacher or a new principal or heating the building more or whatever it might be. But there is a cost that needs to be taken into account. So for the first several years, we looked at what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education certified for per pupil cost and used a 25% factor per student. 2 years ago, we bumped that to 35%. And you can see the quick calculation there. Last year, or this past October, enrollment in the entire district grew by 210 students. So we multiply that by 35% of the most recent certified per pupil expenditures by DESE. And for FY20, that means the growth factor is just over $1 million. Now, I will mention here, the school department is working on a long-range plan, a 5-year plan for funding that they plan to bring back to the long-range planning committee sometime in February. That may end up requiring adjustments to this, but absent that ask being made yet, the recommendation that was submitted on January 15th is what you see here. Of course.
Was there anything in the governor's budget about transportation, school transportation today?
So we were on a call with DESE that focused primarily on Chapter 70. I don't know that there was anything in transportation that would have an impact on us.
Okay.
Sort of piggybacking on this, first of all, my colleagues are on the school committee, oversee the school budget. Everybody knows sort of what my mantra will be, so I won't go into that. And I'm not disputing the numbers, but I just want to keep taking the opportunity when it presents itself, especially in light of the fact that you're saying this school department, school side is discussing a 5-year plan. The original road that we've started on, and in my opinion, on the town side, we've really, not 100%, maybe around the Board of Assessors and things like that, but have come to a compromise. I'm hoping that, and I don't envision that this happens before any possible exclusion or override, but certainly within a 5-year plan, you know, whoever goes to those meetings is sort of the person to advocate for me. I kind of feel like the town side got penalized because the impetus of that whole exercise came out of school and school budget, which none of us oversee. But if somebody could raise, and feel free to say, and I don't agree with her, but I would certainly hope that within their 5-year plan, they will have, because in terms of everything that the DOR has suggested on the town side, we've all but adopted, and I haven't seen that in any form on the school side, towards working towards a finance department or whatever we're going to call it. So I'm just taking advantage of the people who are here because, you know, this has been like a 8-year journey since the beginning of that. And if you tell me, if they tell us the end is in sight in 1, 2, 3, I mean, I would hope it would be more than 5 years. So I'm just taking advantage of that.
Ms. Rowe?
I am the cup that's half full, she's not. But I've heard very positive things from a couple of school committee members about the 5-year plan happening, which makes me extraordinarily happy.
I'm saying that they include.
I know.
It's not.
I know. Well, we'll have to wait, but even talking about it and saying it to me makes me very happy. So that's.
My cup right now is very empty.
I know.
When I get
Mine is a
home,
little
it'll be
full.
very full. But anyways, but you all know where I'm going with that. Okay. And
That will
does,
say-
We've gone there before.
no surprise. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say that on the DOR report, I've had emails, correspondences in both December and January. It's I haven't yet, yeah. So I'm still thinking and trying to figure out the right ways to move that forward.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Town Manager. So someone can
Yeah.
relay that message for me.
Got it.
Not to say you can say I don't agree, but you said it.
Anything else on schools before we move on? Yeah.
It's probably just worth noting that we used to carry in here the kindergarten fee offset, and we don't carry that anymore.
It's a
here.
great point to think to call out. So a number of years ago now, the school department had proposed that if we eliminated kindergarten fees for half-day or full-day kindergarten, that we would get more than what we were collecting in fee in Chapter 70 in return, and that did happen. They eliminated fees, and we received a significant Chapter 70 increase based upon that. So as part of that, we had carried what was a $970,000 amount flat across the plan, because at that point, the school's long-range plan did not intend to increase fees. We made a decision this year that from a clarity point of view and a transparency point of view to try to talk to the community about it, it muddled the message. So we rolled that 970 into the general education base, which means it is inflated by 3.5%. So it gave the school department, about a $30,000 bump. But it recognizes these are costs of general education, just like anything else in the schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So shifting to the town side, I just chose 4 things that I thought were important to highlight, and there may be others that the board would like to talk about as well. But I think the top line thing I want to talk about is the plan that is included in the capital plan to make a major capital reinvestment in the senior center within the central school. It's been fit into the capital plan. We're still working on designs and hope to be able to kick off construction in FY20. I think it really will demonstrate the town's commitment to its senior population, trying to modernize the senior center and enhance its accessibility, make it more welcoming to a range of ages within the senior population. So I think that's a big item within this budget for the board to talk about and for the town to be aware of, and that being the town's commitment to its senior population. The next one I wanted to call out, I'm highlighting as an investment in sustainability, and that's putting a $100,000 budget amount in the DPW to pilot a broader food scrap diversion program. As the board, I think the board is aware from a presentation from the recycling coordinator, we right now have a very small pilot program of 3 neighborhood compost collection bins, one at Grove Street, one at the skating rink, and one down near Waldo Park. As we've looked at future years, turmoil in the recycling markets, and knowing that our waste hauling contract comes open in FY22, we're trying to look at ways to continue to divert waste from the waste stream and save money in preparation for when we have to go back out to bid. One of those ways is to divert food scraps from the waste stream. It's both environmentally the appropriate step to take, and also will likely result in cost savings. So DPW and the recycling coordinator are still working on exactly what the pilot will look like, but broad strokes, what we're envisioning is piloting in some portion of town curbside food scrap pickup, and piloting in perhaps in another part of town an expanded neighborhood drop-off to determine which is more cost-effective and which works better, so that we could consider rolling out a broader program in years going forward. For what it's worth, calling it food scrap and not composting to avoid a slight misstep made by one of our neighbors calling it a composting pickup when they weren't actually composting the materials that were being picked up. We could contract with some place that doesn't compost it and uses it for another, environmentally friendly, but in another manner. So that's why we're calling it food scrap diversion, just to be clear. Also, highlighting an investment in livability. We included funding also in the DPW budget for the development of a sustainable mobility plan, along with having additional funds within that same line item to begin implementing some small-scale pedestrian and bicycle improvements. In future years, once a plan is adopted, I would like to be able to see that line item go towards actually implementing what's recommended in that plan for mobility throughout town. Mobility talks about people walking, people cycling, people driving, people who need disabled access to things. It really looks at the full mobility needs of a community and where improvements need to be made. And then the final thing I'd highlight is an investment in diversity and inclusion. Prior speakers tonight talked about the priority of the town in being concerned about its diversity and inclusiveness. So we're proposing the creation of a manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really, primarily, we would want that person to work with the Disabilities Commission, Human Rights Commission, and Rainbow Commission, along with other groups in town. For a number of years, we've been the beneficiary of a volunteer ADA coordinator who also serves in a full-time capacity as our weatherization coordinator. He's contemplating retirement, so in preparation for getting the benefit of a volunteer ADA coordinator, I don't think is something that's sustainable going forward. So this fills that need, as well as a broader need of really institutionalizing our diversity and inclusion efforts in town. I guess I'd pause for questions here as well.
Diane?
Just for anybody watching, especially on the first project you highlighted, the senior center, when you talk about investing in the senior center, you're also talking about the landscape and the traffic flow, and outside of that, because of, a lot of seniors and non-seniors who use that. As you know, I'm not going to read it or say what they are. Not only around, what the landscape looks out there, but especially from the senior community, it seems like traffic comes by to both of the ways that they get in and not the third. So you'll be looking at, not only bricks and stuff like that, but if there's a better way to design traffic flow and maybe even how the curbing out there looks, you may say you want to do something more equitable.
So the replacement of the bricks is actually already underway in
Oh.
the semicircle.
Gone.
The bricks are gone.
Gone.
Oh, good.
And so that's being completely replaced, as well as the construction of a ramp from the rear parking lot into the side access to the senior center. So that was bid out as a separate sort of starter to the package. So we're right up, we're on top of it.
And if you could, what they were saying was especially what I'm going to call the side entrance that goes right into that main room, so not Academy and not...
It's called the drop-in room.
Yeah, that one there, a lot of times seniors have said, and people with disabilities, when they've come out of there, just the way that's designed, where it hooks into another parking lot, Sometimes people go up there at a fast rate or hit the turn, and maybe there could be, which I know you're gonna look at, maybe like a little bump out of a curb or something that kind of is a visual cue to slow you down, or maybe bump out of a curve if you're hanging that right, you know, if you're taking the left up Academy, because, you know, they said a couple times, you know, and sometimes you ate 5 apples and you say you only ate 2, vice versa, but I've heard from several times, I almost got hit out there, but they said other words, and I don't know if they're politically correct. So anyway, so you're obviously looking at that.
Yeah, definitely.
Excuse me.
On that same issue, would you please put replacing the brick in front of this building as part of a senior improvement? I've had 2 really good friends fall and really be serious, not seriously, but be very, have real problems, injuries. Thank you.
So we are designing, we have design money to reset all of the granite or the granite or marble on the front steps.
That's good.
And then we want to coordinate with that money from DPW to reset the bricks. We are looking at that.
I mean, they don't have to be so trippable.
Agreed.
They can be, you can use bricks and get them set right. And that would make a lot of my friends happy. And I'm one of those senior people that trips on everything. Thank you.
Seeing none.
Okay. So next slide, which I believe is the, 2 more slides. So long-term, the board's going to talk about this, so I don't want to really steal from the board's discussion about an override, but when this budget was submitted, the override stabilization fund would have lasted through FY21 with a deficit based on the town's structural deficit reemerging in FY22. We have put the numbers into the plan that I mentioned earlier, the larger unrestricted general government aid increase, as well as the very significant Chapter 70 increase, and that actually eliminates the projected deficit in FY22 as well. Now, that's absent further school spending. That would be part of the 5-year or long-term plan that we mentioned. But the long-term outlook has shifted since we put this together. As mentioned earlier, the town does continue to invest in its long-term liabilities, both pension and OPEB. There's a long way to go in the OPEB funding, but as compared to most municipalities, Arlington was a leader in this area many, many years ago and continues to be a leader in how much funding they've set aside. And I guess leading into the board's discussion, obviously, there is the debt exclusion to talk about for the high school in June. We're coming to hopefully what will be a final number or a receiving cost estimation next week to work towards a final number for the high school. And there's also much to discuss regarding what exactly an override might look like for the town in June, taking all of these things that we've talked about tonight into account. So in the final slide, just quickly talking about next steps. So the Long Range Planning Committee meets again on February 6th. That's where we'll look at those governor's numbers and hopefully have at least some preliminary numbers from the school department to better understand what their long-term plan is and understand what those impacts will be. As I mentioned earlier, hearings on the departmental budgets start with the Finance Committee on February 13th. We will likely, subject to the chairman's discretion, work to schedule a budget and revenue task force meeting sometime in February or March, depending on what may be appropriate. We'll continue to update the local aid numbers after we talk about them with the Long Range Planning Committee. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we will update the Group Insurance Commission numbers, or our health insurance numbers, on March 1st, so that'll have a budgetary impact. And then finally, also as mentioned earlier, we'll update all of this, working with the Finance Committee, and bring forth a final recommended budget to town meeting, again, hopefully in May, Ms. Mahan. So with that, that is the budget presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions the board might have.
I think I did all mine.
I think I did mine as well.
Excuse me. Move receipt?
Second.
Further discussion?
Sorry, I have a tickle.
Moved by Mrs. Mahan, seconded by Mr. Curo. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very clear.
Excuse me, I'm just going to cough real loud.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Do you need a recess?
Not yet, but if I start coughing again, I might.
All right.
Thank you.
Next up, vote 2019 debt exclusion operating override. So we've had many meetings, we've had many discussions, and last week, or sorry, at our last meeting, I got everybody to nod and say yes to a direction. Joe wasn't here, but Joe also sits in the Long Range Planning Committee with me, so I knew that we were at least broadly aligned. And I said that I'd come back this week with a more formal proposal for us to adopt. And so I just want to run through that. I'm going to read the very beginning and just overview the rest. The Arlington Select Board is committed to putting two Proposition 2.5 ballot questions before the town on June 11th, 2019. Number one, a debt exclusion for the purposes of rebuilding Arlington High School, and two, an operating override to fund the general operations of town and school. One thing is that's a different date than I told you 2 weeks ago. It's a Tuesday, not a Saturday. Town Hall isn't available. There's a bunch of reasons why Tuesday, the 11th, is preferable to the other June date that I had mentioned. The other thing is that, of course, we got news today. Today the governor is saying, "Hey, my budget includes a lot more money." And so one of the things you sit there and you say is, "So why should we still show up tonight at the meeting and ask for an override?" And my answer is yes, and at least with knowing what I know so far. And it's part of the thing that is so powerful about this long-range plan that we adopt every 3 or 5 years is that it frees us from so much of the fickle state ups and downs, and we should continue to embrace that. If we make decisions based on proposals that aren't yet law, and week to week, we're throwing away the advantages of our long-range plan. So that's why I think we should push forward. Then I've got a couple of paragraphs here about the high school rebuild and the schedule that's underneath it, and affirming the work of the high school rebuilding committee, high school rebuild committee, and a little bit about the timeline that they're working on. Then I've got a section here about the operating override, and I'm reminding everybody that in 2005 we promised not to seek an override for 5 years, and it was 6 until the next was proposed. In 2011, the town promised not to seek an override for 3 years, and it's been 8 without an override. And then every year every time we've put those overrides before the town, we've made a serious commitments to the voters at the same time. And I'm saying that we will work this winter to finalize a new list of commitments. The list will include commitment not to ask for another override for a specific number of years, whether it's 3, 4, or 5, but I've already, as you know, I'm leaning towards 4. A commitment to limit increases in spending, so that's talking about, for instance, the 3.5% that Adam just talked about in terms of the school, and 7% in special ed. Like, we should update or reaffirm whatever all of those commitments. And I think that there's a general, in the past we've said we would increase a certain amount for roads, and we'd increase a certain amount for school budget. And I think that the other commitment to service levels as possible, but part of what we're saying is if we can't pay for it, we're going to cut services. Like, that's part of what this commitment is. So the timeline is that we'll take the formal vote and finalize all of those commitments in mid-April. And between now and then, we're going to work on a public discussion with as we have done and will continue to do. Questions, comments, discussion?
I'd like to move
Joe.
approval of the chair's proposed vote. Board. I think you raise exactly the point that we have to emphasize. I mean, we need look no further than another level of our government, which is completely crisis-driven right now, trying to pass a budget. And I think that it is a credit for us to go out early and show that we're using forethought and planning, and we are planning forward for what we know is coming down the pike. That's for starters. Secondly, by going early, and we've talked about this frequently at Budget and Revenue Task Force, we have the ability to buffer the impact somewhat. Depending on the numbers we choose and the longevity, but we actually have that option when we actually put numbers to a final vote for a ballot question. So it's so important. I appreciate that you reiterated the need for us to adopt firm commitments. I've been toying around with some, and I think when we get there, I'll have some that I'd like to put forward. But actually, this board, just tonight, we took some steps towards some of the things that have been on my mind when we put onto the warrant the next steps on some of the protections for seniors. and lower income with the tax deferment, asking town meeting to increase the income level so that we can protect more people with the senior circuit breaker, which we also had discussed last year, and we pretty much committed that we would come back again after looking at it. So I think that when we come to that next step, those are some of the types of commitments I think it's going to be important for us to articulate, that we are interested in protecting those who are vulnerable to this, but we also are committed to a proactive planning and funding of our services, so that we're not up against the wall and we're not having to go to the voters in a fit of fear that everything goes away tomorrow. We can look out into the future. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership on this. I appreciate you bringing this forward. It's going to be an important discussion. I think it's particularly important because the high school project itself, being so large, has sucked up so much of the oxygen of the discussion, but we all know that the operating override is also incredibly important in making those pieces fit, so that we can phase in the impact is going to be so important.
Ms. Rowe.
And I'm going to sound like a broken record. I talked to Adam about this before. I know that the assessors and he are thinking of putting out a statement about the local, the property tax increase. I'm getting a lot of calls about this. I think it's terribly important that we're transparent in what we're doing and have up on the internet both this year's tax information and last year's tax information, so it's completely transparent, and I think that's really important. I think there's a lot of upset right now, and I think we need, in terms of, as we talk about this adding a tremendous amount to fixed income seniors, we need to remember that we have just raised taxes on a number of neighborhoods quite substantially. So we need to have that information before we can even begin to talk about this information, in my opinion.
Ms. Mahan.
Just since we're at the beginning of this process, as well as thinking of the people about 2.5 weeks ago came from an individual meeting. The people that are, everyone's our target audience, but they're on the fence and the strongly leading no. One of the things they had pointed out to me is they were saying, well, you're saying it was 3 and it only lasted, you stretch out to 6 or vice versa. And they said, are you underestimating low? I'm trying to think of the words they said, but I can't say that. Are you underestimating low and then doing that? And what I've said to them is, that'll certainly be defined in the forums when we discuss the override along with the exclusion. I said my personal opinion, but I said I'm going to make sure I'm speaking the right voice, is that we take any override very, very seriously. It's not something we, the analogy I use with them, the money's in the pocket. We don't reach for that pocket if we realize some cost savings from, whether it be grants, whether it be initiatives through employees, department heads, and the town manager where they identified cost savings. If we do, estimate money that is going to come from the state house, the state budget, or through the governor, when we get those monies that we would have to look to an operating override, I basically said, if we get extra money and we're told this is for roads, we don't say, well, we already have, $100 from the override that we can spend on roads. Let's go spend this extra 100 that we got and go, replace bricks at the high school. And I know I'm not saying it appropriately, but that's how I was explaining it to people who were saying it to me. In other words, the reason, but I want a much better crafted message going out. you know, the reason we've been able to stretch these out is because, you know, we take these increase of taxes very seriously, and when we go and say we can guarantee 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we've sat down and gone through a very rigorous exercise to say, what does Arlington want? What services do we have? What do we want to retain? What do we perhaps want to add and delete? That's what will be in the next 3, 4, 5 years, pending anything else from the outside. And that's how we've been able to stretch it, is because of good financial management and fiduciary oversight, and sometimes monies that we, you know, the manager and others have gotten through grants or.
And our town employees pitching in. And going
Exactly,
into
GI,
GIC.
stuff like that, so that, that when we give a projection, that's how it is as it is, but the minute we see any cost savings, we don't, you know, use it as like, oh, now we can do something extra. We say, okay, we don't have to take that out of the, so I would like a better articulated or crafted answer to that, but I think that would be something that maybe should be incorporated into, because I was just hearing it from, mostly on the fence and leaning, you know, so, thank you. And I want to thank the chairman for, I was so excited when, at the last meeting, when you were just writing, you know, verbally saying what it was, I wanted to write it down and say, can we vote this as a thing? And you said, no, I'm going to provide you with a better document, and you certainly did, so thank you.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think similar to what Diane had said, is an argument, if someone were to say, you know, we could be getting more state funds, what's the need for it? I think it's clear based on, you know, the finances of our town in the past 20, 30 years that regardless of whatever the state can provide us, eventually we will need another operating override after this one. We'll commit to the town for a certain number of years, and if the state provides us with more money, then great. We'll push out that need for another operating override, but there's certainly, just because of the restrictions that we work with, you know, this is something that we need to continue to provide the services that the town expects.
All right, everyone's had their say.
Do you need to move it?
No, I got it. I'm just
Oh, that's right.
making
Oh,
sure
sorry.
that nobody else didn't want to rush it, so to speak.
Mhm.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Carroll, seconded by Ms. Rowe, to adopt this, I don't know, commitment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. All right, thank you, everybody. Next up, new business. Ms. Kropelko. Mrs. Kropelko.
I have nothing other than you have a meeting on Monday night also at 7:15.
We'll be back here Monday night, 7:15. Time.
No new business.
Adam.
Just a few quick pieces of new business. Had the opportunity on Friday and Saturday to attend the MMA annual meeting in Boston. As it often is, it was a great opportunity to network and interact with other local government professionals, managers, administrators, mayors, select board members, councilors, finance committee members, and see what other towns are doing and share what we're doing here in Arlington. It's where we first learned about the governor's proposal for unrestricted general government aid. And I was very happy that the MMA, and really what I think was a first time for them, had their keynote speaker at Friday's opening session focus on both female empowerment in government and diversity and inclusion, which for a room that is mostly filled with older white men, it was a powerful message, and a message that was a long time coming. So it was, I was proud to be part of the MMA in having that as their keynote speaker. Also want to mention that this morning I was able to attend the MAPC Metro Common Planning Kickoff for the Inner Core communities in Somerville. Mr. Hurd was able to join, as well as several members of the planning department staff, and really a large amount of people from a lot of our neighboring communities and other communities in the Inner Core. Would you say maybe there's 70, 80 people there in that ballpark?
Yep.
And they're undertaking an effort to look at all the master plans that have been created in the region, including our master plan, and really data mine all of the priorities that are outlined in that plan, group them into categories, and see where there are like goals among towns, and see how we can use that to plan as a region for both 2030 and 2050. So today was just the kickoff, but it really, to me, it helped me see that when we're dealing with issues in Arlington, we're not alone.
No.
Nearly every other one of our neighboring communities is dealing with the same issues in terms of housing growth or school enrollment growth or property tax funding, or whatever it might be, climate resilience, climate mitigation. So it was a very good discussion, and I think it's good for the town to be part of those discussions, because we're not alone, right? We're not on an island here, we're in a region, and being part of planning efforts like this can hopefully make both our planning from a land use point of view, as well as our financial planning, much more effective. And the last thing I'll say is, there's a long weekend and couple of days for our DPW crew. I want to thank them for working what continue to be countless hours to try to clean up the town. I know that, thank you. I know that the results in Arlington and surrounding communities aren't what we were used to seeing, but this was a really difficult storm with the amount of snow that fell and then the dropping temperatures, and I'm not even actually sure what to call the frozen precipitation that fell from the sky for a number of hours after the snow stopped falling. But the crews really did work hard, and again, continue to work hard to clean up crosswalks and routes to school. So they did a great job, and I just want to say thank you to them publicly.
I absolutely agree, and that was one of my items I was going to have too. You know, sometimes you live in New England and you get 6 inches that falls in 4 hours, and you move it over to the side and everything's fine. And then sometimes the sky just does things that you can't explain, and this was definitely one of them. And so I definitely appreciate the work that they put in.
Thank you.
And I noticed that it was a very tall man shoveling in front of Town Hall, getting ready for the Martin Luther King celebration. And we had to go by him twice. I realized it was the head of the DPW. I had to tell Adam, and he had actually stopped and did a little shoveling too.
23 Howard Street next time?
Well, I will tell you that at 2:30 in the morning, the DPW was out clearing snow right near my house and waking me up. But I knew they were doing their job, so I went right back to sleep.
That was all I had. I'm done.
Thank you, Adam. Ms. Rowe.
I only have one thing to say, which is last night I saw the most wonderful film about the Millbrook that was made by a man named Glenn Litton, who is an Arlingtonian, and I'd like to, it's like 6 minutes, and it talks about the history of the Millbrook and what the future is going to be, and it was at the Arlington Land Trust annual meeting. But it was a really phenomenal piece of work with wonderful music, and it just was an excellent presentation about an underused resource in town, and I'd love to show it to you, maybe in the middle of the warrant hearings when we need a little bit of a break.
Get a Pepsi and some butter.
Yeah, something like that, because it was one of the best things I've seen in a long time. I was really proud that it was made in Arlington.
Thank you. Mrs. Mahan.
Just one piece of new business, and I had no idea about the keynote speaker, and I'm with the MMA, I'm really impressed by that, but I honestly had this written down. I was going to ask the chair and the town manager, it's probably already in the works, usually like when we have a new department head or something like that, at an appropriate meeting, if we could bring in the acting police chief, Julie Flaherty, not so much for us, but for people who watch it live and stream and replay. And I think I want to commend publicly the town manager for appointing as acting chief Julie Flaherty. She's really been an unsung hero, and I think a lot of that is a testament to her character. She's, for years, worked at the police department, and she's just there to get the job done. So I really commend on that acting position. I'm not going anything beyond that, but when you all think it's appropriate, at the beginning of the meeting, if we could ask her.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
John.
As the town manager said, I had a great opportunity today to attend the MAPC event. Unfortunately, I came a little late, so I didn't get a seat at the cool kids table, so I was sitting in the back. But notwithstanding from what I heard of the presentation, it was great, and we broke into group discussions, and it was good to talk to our counterparts in other municipalities that are going through the same thing and try to hear, creative solutions to the problems, the common problems that we all have. So it was a good event. Got some chicken and waffles, so you can't beat that for a morning. Then just went to another great MLK celebration on Monday. We had a few of the stars that are amongst us today. I did notice that the town manager snuck out before we had to do the group singing, but I don't know if that was by design. Me and
But he did a great narration of the
Yep.
Duke Ellington piece, so.
Well, me and Dr. Bodie, I think we held our own. I'm just happy I didn't have to sit and sing next to Joe, because I think he upstages us all when that
always
happens.
next year.
But it was a great event, and I just want to commend Dr. Anika Williams, who spoke for a very moving speech.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hurd. And I will note that Acting Chief Flaherty was there with the members of the police department as well. It wasn't just Mr. Rademacher or the manager or Ms. Rowe and Mr. Hurd. The police department was there to make sure folks could cross safely as well at the event. And quite a few people came out despite the horrible weather and the really cold temperatures. Just two things I wanted to mention. I think it's okay to mention the Parking Implementation Governance Committee has met, and one of the things, that we talk about is our recommended uses of Parking Benefits District money, and so one of the things that was determined that will be recommended is to use some of that Parking Benefits District money for brick issues in the center and the sidewalks. So I know a lot of people, and other uses, there's some other uses as well. But I know folks will be very happy to hear that. I know there's also a new, it was reported that there's a new contract for maintenance on some of the meters as well. There have been some issues with some of those, the meters there. So I think everyone was happy to learn that as well. I also, as your liaison, I attended the last Council on Aging meeting. I know that they've gotten questions also since the assessments went out. They are available to try to help work with seniors on what they're qualified for. And the council board itself actually created a subcommittee. I think it's Michael Quinn, who I think a lot of us know, and Rick Fenton, both of whom have financial backgrounds, will be looking at all of the eligible programs to try to help the effort to get the word out around.
Joe, I think one of the things, Ken Donnelly did that. And I'm probably 2011.
Yeah, and there was reference to that.
And I thought I might ask Cindy to do it again, because I think it was helpful to not just have us do it in the override high school work, but to have somebody at a state level listen to what the concerns were.
Right.
And I haven't asked her, but I've been meaning to ask her. I know that the people working on the campaign for the override and debt exclusion are very interested in having a forum for seniors, so.
I think it's a great idea. I just want to let you know that some of the COA board members will be ready to assist in informational purposes there. They are also working with the Arlington Seniors Association on a little capital campaign, I think, to furnish the senior center when the renovations are all done. I guess that's the approach that was taken the last time renovations were done there at the senior center. So that is something that was discussed at the last board meeting as well, working together. The ASA, which of course is a private nonprofit, and the COA board, they'll be working on that. And I know that the renovations, maybe we'll get an update at some point at this meeting, but I know they're moving forward, and I was happy to see those bricks gone, and to learn that it'll be possible to move some of the functions of the building around within the building without having to move programming down the street or anything. So, yeah, exactly right. That's all I have.
I have one item left, which is, as chair, I get the unbelievable opportunity to sit on the Audit Advisory Committee. Yeah, and we met for 93 minutes, not that I was counting those number of minutes. And.
Is that an audited number?
Oh my God, those meetings take forever. And I mean, and it's just not, I mean, they do excellent work, it's just not my,
Yeah,
I'm not an auditor.
I just read my accountant's audit letter. It was 10 pages. And, I mean, I'm used to it, I read it every year, so but boy, their language is promulgated on many words that nobody ever hears except in the annual audit letter.
Yeah.
It's,
So we got a draft audit. You'll all get copies of it when it becomes, I mean, you can see the draft, but we'll also all get copies of it when it's final. There were no significant findings, with the exception of the one which we knew well ahead of time was going to be that the accounting rules changed, and now we have to carry OPEB on our books. So it looks like the town is in much worse financial conditions this year than it was last year. But everybody looks like that because everybody's there. So it's just, but you know, the columns, you know, they move.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. And also, I walked in and I recognized, of course, everybody in the room. I even recognized the auditors, which tells you you've been doing this job for maybe a while. You recognize the auditors, but there's somebody I didn't know, and it was the new school CFO, and I was really excited to meet him too. So that's my item.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. We will be back for our next meeting on Monday at 7:15.